Jack Arnold, even early on, was amazing for his interest in theatrics and really wanted to go into some form of acting or film. His parents really kind of dissuaded him from that. They wanted him to become a doctor or a lawyer. Arnold would joke that all good Jewish parents would want you to go into law or becoming a physician. But he rebelled against that. And his younger sister took dance lessons and piano lessons as well. And I think Jack was more attracted to that and would even emulate his sister when she was practicing. So Jack really wasn't allowed to take any of these lessons, but he followed along with his sister. And I think to that extent, his younger sister really taught him how to perform. And his interest included in high school comedy. And I think we can see that going through all of his work later on with working with Peter Sellers and The Mouse That Roared and working on all of those really wacky comedies on TV in the 60s in his later career. So I think he was always naturally drawn to comedy, even though we tend to associate him as a person more interested in science fiction. Later on, he got into the technology of filmmaking. So he joined, during the war, he joined the Army Signal Corps. I think he felt that that was his duty, and he actually left a Broadway show that was very successful that he was acting in at the time, and went into the Signal Corps and quickly found out that he wouldn't really be flying airplanes and he wouldn't be, doing that kind of exciting things, but they had a film department. And I think he was ecstatic when he found out that that he could actually make movies while he was serving in the military. The prerequisite was that he learned to handle a Mitchell camera, one of those big film cameras in the 30s and 40s. So he actually went to the manufacturer of the camera in New York, spent, I think, an entire day just practicing threading a Mitchell camera, probably the Mitchell SS, which I think was the camera used in the Signal Corps, made specifically for the Signal Corps at that time. Just a bulky, clumsy machine. And he got very fast at it. So he could thread a camera really very quickly. And that was the main criteria. So he was happy to join that, to do filming for the Signal Corps. The films that he did with the Signal Corps were important too, because that was an extension of what he had done on Broadway. Some of the Broadway shows, he had made sort of a cottage industry of filming the Broadway productions. And he could then go sell those to the performers who would be interested in seeing themselves and, how they look on the stage and how they acted. So I think that just accelerated his interest in both the performing part and the technology. And I think that's the important thing about Jack Arnold, is that he's not only interested in the arts, the performance aspect, really the humanity of filmmaking. I think he was very good at plotting out stories, human stories. And I think that was one of the really great things about his work. He was an early adopter of storyboards, and a lot of those storyboards still exist that he drew, not entirely artfully, but certainly to represent certain scenes that he was telling. So he was a technological storyteller about the human condition.
Jack Arnold has a sense of style that a lot of critics of his time and even currently scholars will call various different types of plain, flat, straightforward. These are often meant to, even parts of essays that or assessments of Arnold's work that are meant to be praiseworthy, but they still seem to have a difficulty with the sense of plainness, of unadornedness of Arnold's work. And in part, if we're talking about the 50s films, for the most part, I think we're talking about the limitations of mid-budget filmmaking and Universal International's so-called, or quote unquote, what could be called a studio style of Universal International pictures, which because of the mid-budgets were not developed through these elaborate sets. And there are elements in his films that achieve this kind of poetic punctuation, where in his Academy Award nominated documentary With These Hands, which is about the formation of a women's labor union, women's garment workers, there is of course, the plain, very, very harsh, almost kitchen sink, the British kitchen sink realism style that he's developing in this film, where we have the visions of low income life and realities. And then we have this beautifully staged factory fire that's one of the catalysts for forming this union. So a lot of workers get trapped in the factory, and which is a story we know well these days as well, but they don't make it out, and the conditions of their work come the end of their lives. And so Arnold sort of, as much as this is a film With These Hands about the formation of this incredible effort to unionize, so there's a real optimism there, he undercuts it with the subsequent scenes after this horrendous conflagration. Instantly we hear the sounds of almost moaning choral voices and a parade of shadows, and we don't know exactly where these shadows are moving in this kind of slanted line across the screen, all very abstracted. And then as we cut back, we see that it's shadows passing by a line of coffins of the dead from the incident. And this moment is not unique to Arnold's films. It's very quite characteristic of the later films.
One important thing about Jack Arnold and his work in science fiction films, really science fiction bordering on horror films, we might say, was how closely he was involved with the technology, and specifically with 3D technology. He was really one of the leading people that was involved in the development of 3D. I think Arnold always had was always skeptical about 3D as a commercial enterprise, because it involved so much work in the local theaters, and in some cases, new equipment, new screens. So I think he always had this sense that economically, 3D would never be great, but he developed a lot of the really, really interesting 3D techniques before it came from outer space in 1953, and then for other movies beyond that. And I think we can see his interest in 3D even working later on in the 60s. So even in The Swiss Conspiracy, it starts out with suitcases coming down an airport luggage chute. And the viewer, I think, is just tempted to think, wow, wouldn't this be great if it was in 3D? The baggage is going to hit me. So I think he had that sense of sort of like involving the viewer in the action, and from a technical standpoint, just making the viewer part of the film.
One of the interesting characteristics of this style, though, is in Arnold, is that it's possibly informed by having been an apprentice to a documentary filmmaker, Robert Flaherty, who made Nanook of the North. And Arnold develops a real sensibility around getting stuff done. You develop a kind of style, either whether that's through the studio's facilities, and that's dictated there, or it's through budgetary limitations. Arnold worked with medium budgets, not small budgets, so he had some money. But it there's a sense of that sort of quickness that those projects have to happen, and the way that they came together with similar people, and that Arnold is working with his own storyboards in many cases. He storyboarded all of Incredible Shrinking Man. He's directing the film on set, but he's also conceiving the film behind the scenes. And then script writing. He wrote his own script for Tarantula. He wrote the ending of Incredible Shrinking Man. So there, and fought for it. So there's these elements where, and even he admits in an interview, several interviews, that he felt like he was working under, I'm not sure he uses the word auteurist, but he felt like he was working under the conditions of an auteur. He had full control.
The comedy aspect, I think, was probably more important with Arnold than we might think. Again, because we associate him with these scary productions, the science fiction monster movies that he did early in his career. But he really had a great sense of comedy and comic timing, and was great at directing actors in comedic roles. There's a great story about how Sherwood Schwartz brought him in to the set of Gilligan's Island so that he could bring the cast together. Apparently, they were having lots of trouble with the cast just not getting along on Gilligan's Island, and they needed a doctor, basically, a script doctor and a human doctor to get these people together, and Jack did that. You might even say that he essentially saved Gilligan's Island, because it was struggling at that point, just because of the tension with the cast members. But of course, early on, he also worked with some greats of comedy. So his work with Peter Sellers, for instance, The Mouse That Roared, a TV movie that was, I think, just a huge success on TV and as a film in Europe. So he directed one of the greats of comedy. That was Peter Sellers, probably his first major film. And it's just wonderful to watch, even at this point, the absurdity of a small duchy declaring war on the United States in order to get basically relief payments. Just from the concept, it's just a wonderful story. And Arnold is able to direct the very broad comedy, I think, just very well. One of the triumphs of Jack Arnold in his later life, working on television, was just that he got involved in some really very big comedies, The Brady Bunch, The Love Boat. He was really involved in that, but he was also involved in mystery stories, detective stories. And he did 6 episodes, for example, of Peter Gunn, the Blake Edwards jazz-oriented kind of noir detective show, with just wonderful music. I think the music has probably outlived that television show, but Jack Arnold was, I think, just very supportive and very able to convey that noir sensibility in Peter Gunn and in Mr. Lucky, which was a 1959 TV show that Jack Arnold actually produced. He produced all 34 episodes of that television show. And that was kind of an unusual thing for him to do. And I think, again, it shows just how versatile he was. He was brought in to do the Metaluna sections of This Island Earth. So he was not the director there. He's not officially credited as a director. But when the action takes place on another planet, the producers realized they needed a director there who was familiar with science fiction and could deal with the presence of a very formidable monster and a heroine in distress and a strong hero. All of those factors were working in the Metaluna sequence. And I think Jack Arnold just brilliantly carried that off.
Creature from the Black Lagoon has imagery where, of course, the initial imagery of the explorers coming into the scene, into the lagoon, the jungle scene, uh, it's very, it's stark and straightforward. But as soon as we go underwater with the creature, the film becomes unleashed. And as much as there's the commentary about this dance sequence, the underwater dance between the creature and the woman swimming in parallel, and he's mimicking, not mocking, her formations and her swimming movements as a kind of way of trying to communicate with her. We're down there with them in this completely just astonishing underwater ballet, and better than synchronized swimming. There's also this sense of scale that I think is really key to Arnold's work. And if you want to call Arnold a visionary, I think one of the ways it comes is in the way, as I was mentioning before, the way the poetry punctuates these sort of more straightforward, almost documentary elements in his films. These scenes of poetry, but also in the scale, the way he uses scale on a kind of, in these films, a large sense of vast, expansive desert. Humans are diminished in these scenes. There's a sense that the Earth is already cosmic. You don't need aliens to come and invade your space. The space itself is absolutely terrifying. And so in It Came from Outer Space, we've got vast expanses of desert. In fact, when the aliens land in that film and we get there, it's one of the earliest instances, if not the first instance, of alien POV, point of view shots of distorted alien eyes looking at desert landscapes. It's rarely they're even looking at humans. We see the desert landscape itself distorted and reshaped in their eyes from their perspective. And there's something about that visual munching up of the landscape that the aliens are doing. And the fact that the aliens are not there to harm humans, they're not there to study them, they're not there to eat them or destroy them or clone them or anything. They're just there as a pit stop. And what they're really there to do is avoid humans, because humans are fearful and they're afraid of the human violence born of that fear. In the Space Children, there is also this sense of the military's there, they're developing a space weapon that's something like a Star Wars, what would be called Star Wars in the 80s. And the aliens come in really just to stop this system of weaponized satellites. And they do it through infiltrating the kid's brain by sort of landing there, implanting an alien brain that affects the kids. But all the time we have this whole scenario, we have the roaring kind of waves of the ocean constantly crashing on shore, and the kids find the alien entity among the rocks in a cave where there are waves washing in. And the immense power of the ocean, this incredible scale that they're next to, diminishes anything that the military is already doing. That these people living in little trailers there are trying to control space so that they can weaponize space. The aliens come in with their grand scale saying, not so much. We're gonna, repurpose your children so that they will work against this plan. And just the melancholia too of that particular film is compelling, and the way that the children become sort of sapped of energy. The film begins with all these very documentary style scenes of setting up the family's interactions with each other and the kids' excitement and it's a new adventure. And by the end of the film, these kids are just walking around like they just have like the knowledge that the universe is just a horrendous chaos just revealed to them and open to them is really compelling and sad, but wonderfully sad in a way. I'm thinking in terms of the melancholia of something like Space Children, and thinking of Incredible Shrinking Man, and how the Scott Kerry character, as he shrinks, I think in some ways the Arnold scale, as much as that shrinks smaller rather than going vast, what happens is the house becomes this vast, terrifying space, and objects change their purpose. A ball of yarn is a giant boulder that's immovable, or a needle becomes a sword that you can destroy your spider enemy with, or even oddly, like a match, rather than for warmth, is used to cut the string because the scissors are too large for Scott Kerry to use. So that in that film, objects take on human objects take on an incredibly immense scale as Scott Kerry, played by Grant Williams, diminishes in size to microscopic size. And we realize that the cosmos exists not just outside, but also smaller and smaller inside, as down to the droplet of water, or that becomes its own universe and things like this. And there's a moment where Carrie is in almost microscopic form, staring up at the stars, saying, "They look just the same size to me as when I was a full-sized human." This kind of element in Arnold's films, and in that case, Incredible Shrinking Man, one that he had to argue for, the ending was not supposed to be so pessimistic in some ways. These elements are absolutely characteristic of a visionary, of someone who has a sensibility that he wants to express.
The Swiss Conspiracy was Jack Arnold's final feature film. But you really don't sense that when you're watching the movie. It really does capture, in 1976, a lot of the elements of the spy craze that was really so prominent in the 60s and carried on through, I think, much of the 70s as well. So that same kind of intrigue, it deals with banking and secret Swiss accounts. So it's not really a spy movie as such, but I think a lot of the mystery and the suspense, the very clever plot, the resolution of the film, I think, is very unexpected and unique. But I think mainly what that film has, and what Arnold was able to project, was just the sort of glamour that we expect from a spy film, from something taking place in Switzerland. We have the glamour, we have the beautiful photography. I think we can't overestimate how important the photography and the natural scenery is. And I think David Janssen is just probably the perfect star for this film, because Janssen always has that kind of vulnerable, understated acting mannerism that when you set it in a high suspense movie like this, like The Swiss Conspiracy, it really is a counterpoint, and it really adds, I think, more tension to it. But you identify with David Janssen, and I think he's just a great character there. We have glamorous actresses. Senta Berger, I think, is just wonderful in this film. Plays a very good and unexpected role in the film. Elke Summer, of course, and we're really talking spy movie cast here. The glamour of this whole cast, and I think it's important to note too that Jack Arnold pretty much put that cast together. That was not from central casting. That was Arnold finding these people and bringing them into a film that would turn out to be his last feature film, and really made the whole thing work, just from an acting standpoint, from the standpoint of the scenery, and he had a great story, I think, to work with as well. And he did all of this in the middle of a pretty severe illness. So Jack Arnold had suffered really with various illnesses all of his life. He had, I think, something like 13 surgeries during his life. He had arteriosclerosis at the end, and apparently that was affecting his memory. He didn't have Alzheimer's, but he had trouble remembering things. His short-term and long-term memory would blink in and out, apparently. So I think that was a challenge for him. He had to leave the set of The Swiss Conspiracy before the film was edited, and I think that always bothered him. He maintained that the film really was ruined in editing. And again, Arnold knew so much about every aspect of the film business, the technical aspect, photography, and editing, that I think he had a real conception of what he wanted to see in this film, and that conception wasn't realized. Now, we may watch that film today and think, well, it's good. It's a pretty good movie. What would Jack Arnold have done? And, really, I'm hard pressed to say, but I trust that he would have somehow made it better in the editing room.
But I also think that there's a real strain of decentering the human in his films. Even these alien invasion films in the 50s that certainly carry the anxieties of atomic apocalypse, potential atomic war. He's still not as interested in only human survival. He's interested in looking at humanity against really intense grand scales that become incredibly cosmic and very, very interesting. And if we look at something back to Creature from the Black Lagoon, which maybe is less cosmic in its scale, it's still planetary. It's an ecological horror film. It's about the environment. It's about what we're doing to the environment. We go in and we burn and we pillage it and we take what we want and we create curiosities out of the things we don't understand and we turn them into monsters. And the planet in Arnold is often itself a kind of a monster. Deserts, oceanscapes, lagoons. We have these spaces that are classic monstrous spaces, and Arnold does a lot with those.